all are, mainly written by Jews and to Jews. But Matthew in particular is intent on linking the person of Jesus with the grander story of the Old Testament, including some of the really important figures from the Old Testament, like David. That's King David, right? And Abraham, the patriarch, and Moses. The fancy word there in italics is just, it's incipit, it's Latin, it's just the title of the gospel, right? So this is the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of who? Okay, no one knows the Gospel of Matthew, great. Oh, it's a good thing we're here then, right? The son of David, the son of Abraham, right? It shows up in the beginning. It's just right on the front page when you open up to the Gospel of Matthew. Oh, wrong button. There we go. In addition, this is important, we have 54 quotations from the Old Testament in the Gospel of Matthew. That's a lot. That's 54 times that the author of Matthew goes out of his way to tell us, oh, and then these things happened, all in order to fulfill what was written in the prophets or somewhere in the scriptures. And he does that 54 times, which if you look at some of the other Gospels, right, John 14, boo, right? Not boo, it's just not as many, right? And we've got Luke 25 and Mark 20. I mean, it's more than twice the amount than the other Gospels. That's a lot, that's significant. Now, those are just the quotations. That's just the obvious stuff. Right? Then we have, when people write things, they can sort of reference or allude to other things in more sort of implied ways. And Matthew does this according to a great scholar. His name is Donald Sr. He's no longer with us. But he counted, in his estimation, 294 allusions, that means references, not quotations, back to the Old Testament. That's a lot, okay? That means you cannot read very far in the Gospel of Matthew without being pulled back to some story from the Old Testament. And that, my friends, is significant. Yeah? And the point of this, okay, the point of this Jewish flavor in Matthew, the point of all of these, which we call these references back to the Old Testament, as John Mark was saying in my bio, we call that intertextuality. Okay? It's just a fancy word, the relationship between two set of texts. Here, Matthew and the Old Testament. Right? The reason that that's important is that it encourages us. And that's to say, that's not, I don't think that's putting it strongly enough. I think it's more than encouraging. It is creating an obligation on us to, when we read that gospel, to always carry with us in the backs of our minds the stories of the Old Testament. Okay? This is why, this is one of the reasons why the Old Testament is so important.
Amen.
Okay? Yes, thank you. Amen. One of them, not the only one, but one of them, okay, is that in fact, we just miss so much of the glory, of the goodness of the New Testament if we don't understand that the Old Testament is the whole backdrop for the story. Okay? So that's Matthew's Jewishness. Now, remember I talked about this word, the incipit, yeah? The title of, or the first sentence in the Gospel of Matthew. And in Matthew, it's that, the weird letters up there, by the way, is Greek. Okay, and this is why you need to sign up in the fall for BLAN 201, which is beginning Greek. I'll be teaching it. You guys should all take it. It's fun. Even if you're not a Theo major, you're welcome. I don't discriminate. Okay, and it'll be a lot of fun because you'll be able to sort of read those words up there. Okay, in Greek it is Vivlos Genesios Jesu Christou Huiou David. Okay, it is the book of the Genesis, the books of the origins. Okay, of Jesus the Christ, the Son of David. Okay? And that's just the beginning, right? And that means that when scholars have looked at the Gospel of Matthew, they're like, well, David must be an important guy for how Matthew is presenting Jesus. Does that make sense, right? If that's the first line, it might be important. Well, yeah, it probably is. So a lot of scholars have tried to look at the Old Testament in books like Ezekiel, books like Micah, and of course the Psalms. Yeah, if you've taken Old Testament survey with me or Dr. Jackson, you know that David wrote quite a few of those. That's where you'd find stories of David. And so people have gone to look there, okay, to see how does Matthew draw on those texts in the Gospel of Matthew. Okay? That's just what I just said in that point. Now, here's the kicker a little bit, and this is what's kind of spawned my research. There's not a single scholarly work that systematically explores how, 1st and 2nd Samuel inform Matthew's version of David. And if you think about it, where do you find the most information about David? 1st and 2nd Samuel. At least, those are the main texts, right? That give us the story of the young David, shepherd boy, rising to power, and then eventually, sort of metaphorically, shepherding the people of Israel. Now, since David is clearly this very, very important figure for Matthew, we see that just straight there in the genealogy. And it's not just the incipit. This is the fun stuff. If I ever get to teach a class on Matthew, you can do this whole thing with how Matthew divides the genealogies, and there's this whole sort of Hebrew gematria thing with the name David in Hebrew. It's really cool. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. It's too complicated for right now. But David is clearly really, really important. Clearly, right? And so I just thought, hey, no one has done this. Right? I thought it would be relevant to look at these texts, 1st and 2nd Samuel, and their view, their portrayal of David's kingship, and then see how and if. You always have to ask yourself, right? You don't want to just superimpose these things into there as if they're just normal, right? So I went, okay, how and if, right, do these texts show up in the Gospel of Matthew, and how might they help us better understand how Matthew is presenting Jesus? Yeah? In other words, how do they get used in Matthew? And like I said, that is a valid way of doing things, and they give you a PhD for this if no one else has done it. That's really the thing, okay? That's really how you do it. This is part of why it's hard, too, because you have to come up with something that they say contributes to the academy, which means you need to write something, research something that no one's done before. Otherwise, we don't want to bother with it. Okay, and so that's what I did. I went, hey, okay, let's go do that. And no one has done this, or no one had done it until I did it, and probably for good reason, right? You're like, is everyone blind or am I stupid? Which it could be both things, you never know. That's one of those things, right? But some people were asking me, well, why are you doing that? Why are you looking at 1st and 2nd Samuel? There's not a whole lot going on with that. And I was like, okay, well, no, not as much as the Psalms. Not as much as Isaiah. Everyone loves Isaiah, right? Everyone loves the Psalms. That's everyone, I mean the New Testament writers. They can't not include those. Jeremiah, all the big guys are all there. But I thought, you know what? I think we have 3, just to start with.